So thank you everyone for joining and welcome to today's event where we're looking at how communities affected by the extractives industry can use transparency initiatives to boost accountability in Nigeria. If we just go on to the next slide. My name's Calvin. I'm the Programs Director at SDN. I'll be facilitating the event today, and we have 4 panelists joining us. We've got Flora Seri from SDN as well, our Project Officer. We have Iniobong Usen, the Lead on Extractives and Open Data at Policy Alert. We have Tireni Alua, Program Officer, actually Program Manager now at PLSI. Sorry for that not being updated. And Vlan Johnson, the team lead at Budget. All of our organizations in different ways have been doing work on extractives industry financial transparency and the impacts of the extractives industry on host communities in Nigeria, and particularly the Niger Delta, where the extractives industry, the oil and gas industry, is predominantly based. Next slide, please. Today's agenda. Well, I'm going to do a quick introduction. We're then going to hand over to Flora SDN, who's going to talk us through a case study looking at a report that we are launching today, looking at extractives payment transparency and how to combine this with community action to bring about change on the ground. And then we're going to have 3 panel presentations from Budget, PLSI and Policy Alert, giving a bit of an overview of the work that they've been doing in this area. Hopefully this is going to take about half an hour, so we'll have the remaining half hour for question and answers. Next slide, please. Just quickly a note on participating in today's webinar. Please use the chat box, and we've got it circled here down the bottom center of your screen. So if you want to ask any questions or make any comments, feel free to do so. You can do so whilst we're doing the presentations, but we'll pick these up as best we can in the question and answer session in the second part of today's event. Next slide, please. So by way of introductory information, you're probably all familiar with SDN, but in case not, we're a Port Harcourt-based civil society organisation. We have worked in the Niger Delta for over 15 years. We work with those affected by and promote good governance in the oil and gas sector. I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who've been supporting our work in this area. And just to note that, of course, the information analysis we'll present today does not necessarily represent their views or policies. And today we are recording the event, and we will make that recording and associated resources available after today's presentation. Next slide, please. So a bit of context and background to the purpose of today's event. Most of you probably already know that huge revenues have been generated by the oil and gas industry over the decades in Nigeria. That industry is predominantly concentrated in the Niger Delta. But we've often seen limited benefits for communities in the Niger Delta, and that's also true for citizens beyond the Niger Delta across Nigeria. But on the other hand, in the past years, decade, we've seen a trend of increasing financial transparency. So we now have access to more information than we've ever had before on which companies are paying which parts of government, which particular extractives projects that these payments derive from. So we have a wealth of information on financial flows in the oil and gas industry. And we're now faced with a common challenge when it comes to transparency initiatives of how we turn this wealth of information to change on the ground. And I think that this is the core challenge that is posed to civil society when it comes to this increased financial transparency that we now have, and something that I think ourselves and participants on today's webinar, it's a challenge that we are trying to grapple with. How can we take these high-level transparency initiatives, which are providing this wealth of information, and combine it with the work we are doing with communities on the ground to bring about positive changes for those that live in countries and specifically in communities affected by the extractives industry. And that's really the purpose of today's discussion. We're going to be presenting work that we've been doing. Hopefully it's an opportunity to share ideas, make new connections, find out more about what others are doing in this area in Nigeria and the Niger Delta specifically. Next slide, please. So just quickly, as I say, this is an opportunity for us at SDN today to launch a report we've just released, which starts to look at this particular problem and how at SDN we could make use of financial transparency in the work that we do with communities on the ground, which is what Flora is going to talk about. I want to say thank you very much to PLSI, Policy Alert and Budget, not just for participating in today's event, but they've also helped with this particular report as well. So whether that was collaborating with us on fieldwork or reviewing the report itself. So thank you very much to them. They're all doing fantastic work in this area. So it's going to be great to hear from them today and some of the work they've been doing. So without further ado, I will hand over to Flora.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So like Calvin mentioned, my name is Flora Sierri and I work for SDN. I'm the Senior Project Officer for the governance component of this work. And today I'll be sharing briefly findings from our research paper, Oil Money for Development in Nigeria, and how financial transparency initiatives can help communities to get a fair deal in the Niger Delta. But beforehand, I'd like to propagate some of our key messages from this research findings. Now, payment to government data has been able to enable civil society organizations to have access to information and thereby, triggering better understanding of government revenue. So, for example, we know where government revenue is generated from, which of the government agency or parastatal that same money is paid to, and the location where that money is being used or implemented. And then for government budgets, budgets, whenever it's accessible, enables us to be able to access knowledge about how revenue gotten from oil is being utilized in host communities of the extractive industries, that has been impacted. And then payment to government data combined with this budget can enable civil society and citizens to scrutinize some of these government spendings and also match if it is equivalent to what is being derived from the communities. And with the tracking and vetting of the resource benefits by the community groups, this would further present evidence on how to push, the transparency and accountability agenda further in government spending. So particularly what I'll be talking about is how civil society and communities affected by the oil and gas industry can make use of this initiative to bring about the necessary change in their various communities in the Niger Delta. So how do you follow the money? Now, basically, you follow it in three ways. Payment to government data from the natives. So for example, the Nigerian Extractive Industry and Transparency Initiative and other initiatives. What they do is disclose how much revenue comes from which oil and gas company and who or the relevant government agency that it is being paid to, and how the payment is being translated to development on the ground. Now, if you combine this information with government budgets, what it affords you as a civil society organization or a community member is you'd be able to detect the allocation of government in terms of their budget and see where some of this development project is being enacted, and then be able to vet it. So in collaboration with community members, what they can do is to see if government spending on ground actually matches whatever it is that is derived from the oil and gas industry. I would like to stress at this point that the particular case study focuses on the Niger Delta Development Commission just to show how community members can make use of some of this payment to government data to ensure that wealth is translated on ground in their various communities. So without much further ado, the next slide shows us an infographic. Now, according to the Nigerian Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, between 2014 and 2018, for the last 5 years, Nddc collected a levy that amounts to $3 billion US. Now, I must say at this point that 3% total of the annual budget of any oil and gas producing company goes directly to the Nddc. This is outside whatever it is the Nigerian government gives to the Nddc for development projects in the region. Now, from this data, it then goes further to see how civil society organizations can make use of the information and then with the necessary budgets, look at projects in the communities, combine it with on-the-site evaluation of these projects with community members. Now at SDN, what we've been able to do is work with our community monitoring and advocacy group in communities across Rivers State and Bayelsa to vet some of these projects. Now, for this study, a total of 133 projects were visited and vetted by community members, and of course, SDN in collaboration with Budget and PLSI. Now, the next slide shows you a sample of the Nddc budget. Nddc releases their budget, although it's very difficult, I must say at this point, to get government budgets. Nddc covers a period of years where development projects takes place. Now, the infographic in front of you shows a sample of Rivers State budget by the Nddc. What it shows you is the project type, if it's an agricultural project, if it's an infrastructural project, it shows you that. It shows you the location, be it the particular local government area and the community. It then shows you the or is it shore embankment project or any other kind of project, it shows you that. And then it shows you the particular amount that has been committed by the Nddc to push the project forward, and shows you the amount that is dropped according to the years. Now, for the sample, it shows you the 2016 and 2017 Nddc budget. Now, with all of this information made available to our community groups, what they were able to do is to go on site and vet some of these Nddc projects. Now, like I mentioned earlier, a total of 133 projects were visited across Rivers State and Bayelsa State. In Rivers State, they covered Ugobolo local government area, local government area, the Obia, while in Bayelsa, the communities that were covered for the purpose of this survey and research was the Ogba local government area and the Inagwa local government area. We also need to, at this point, bring to your notice that at the period where this research was undertaken, it was the peak of the flood period, and so some communities were inaccessible. But from the visit by the community members in collaboration with SDN and her partners, were able to notice that about 77% out of the 133 projects have started. So it shows that projects have actually started in these communities. However, 50% shows unsatisfactory flaggings or ratings by community members. The next slide shows you some of the pictures from our project visits. Now, in the slide you're seeing, it covers a project in Port Harcourt. So you can see some parts of the roads. This is supposed to be construction of internal roads. Some parts have been completed while some other parts are not completed. And then the next slide shows you a very peculiar story. Now, this is Ogo community in Ogubolo local government area of Rivers State. Now, This particular project has been abandoned since 2016. The shipments and all, the caravan was dumped in the community, but the project was abandoned. And because of the long stretch, community members broke into the facility and have been using the materials for the shore embankment project, which would ease flooding in Ogu community. And they've been using it to barricade their shops and their homes as a form of design. Quickly to the next slide. What this shows you is that with all of this information made available, payment to government data by transparency initiatives has made it easy for civil society to streamline where government gets its funding from and the particular government body where these particular funds are being placed, and then in collaboration with community members and access to government budgets is translated. So for example, how are host communities able to ascertain the level of development according to what is being derived from the community? Now, I need to stress at this point that it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the funds that's being generated in the Niger Delta has to go into the community. But the little that has been posited in the Niger Delta, how is it being used? This leads us to some of the key recommendations that this research, propagates. So for example, there is need for local civil societies to be supported to monitor how these public funds are being spent by government. And it also entails working with community members who are on ground to ensure that some of these projects, as is reflected in the budget, is being vetted and, given like real-time demarcation and of course evaluation. It also shows us that CSOs, working on transparency and accountability issues need to collaborate more. Remember, as an organization, we cannot do it all, and that was why SDN collaborated with Budget PLSI and of course policy forward. And I also should note at this point that shared at the end of this webinar and work with other civil society organizations and the community to see how we can make use of payment to government data and translate it to real-time development in host communities, that are being impacted by the extractive industries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Flora, for that. That was great. Sorry for the slight network issues there, but I think we could mainly hear what Flora was saying. And hopefully that provides a good example of how we can start to analyze the distribution of revenues and spending across particular locations, and then working with communities, actually see what is happening on the ground so that we can then use this information to strengthen accountability initiatives where we're trying to hold government to account for proper provision of projects, services in communities. And so now over to PLSI and Tereni, who's going to give a quick overview of their work. Over to you, Tereni.
Thank you very much, Calvin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tereni Itoye. I'm representing Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative, and I'm going to be talking about our resource benefit initiative so far in the extractive community. Next slide, please. So Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative, we're a civic organization and we work to promote citizens' active participation in the Nigerian public audit space. And we do this through different technological tools because technology is what we believe brings everybody together. So we have our Value for Money platform, which is aimed at fostering public accountability, good governance, and development of underserved communities. So what I'm going to focus mainly on today is our resource benefits platform, which we use to maximize the benefits of natural resources, especially in extractive activities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, yes, that's fine. So our work so far, so we use different civic activities and resourcebenefits.ng. That is the website, which is one of the tools we use. So we use this platform to promote transparency and accountability in the management of natural resources revenue in Nigeria. So we employ audit data, which we source from the Nddc, Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, and also payment to government data sourced from the NRGI, Natural Resource Governance Institute. This data is what we now take and further simplify as much as we can and release to the public, which is on our website, www.resourcebenefit.ng, so that everybody can understand, because this data, when it comes in, it's not so easily understandable. So that is where we come in. Next slide, please. So our resource benefit initiative is through our resourcebenefits.ng platform, which allows for monitoring utilization of extractive activities. So when you go on this our website, you see this icon, and when you click on it, you can see the projects that we have monitored, and then we have the opportunity also for citizens of disaffected communities to also report abandoned projects in their host communities. And we also have the opportunity we also give this opportunity of sharing negative impact of extractive activities around you. So what we now do with all this data is it now helps our advocacy efforts, which we do through our social media advocacy. We have sensitization workshops, we have community engagement. So it's all of this data put together that we work with and to push our advocacy efforts. And also I wanted to just thank SDN for this opportunity given to PLSI. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tirani. And no, thank you for participating. And I encourage anyone who's working on this area in Nigeria to take a look at the resource benefits site, because there's a wealth of information there that can support your work. So thank you very much for that, Tirani. So we're going to hand over to Iniobong now from Policy Alert.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Iniobong and I'm the lead on extractives and open data at Policy Alert. And basically what we do at Policy Alert is to broaden the civic space and deepen citizens' engagement with policy and legislative processes, especially at the subnational level. Next slide, please. The next slide. Next slide again, please. So yeah, basically three major areas that we use transparency data in furthering our work. First of which we're talking about today, which is bordered on the extractive industry transparency. We also use data in budget analysis, advocacy and tracking, and also for furthering causes on environmental justice. The next slide, please. So we all know that transparency initiatives like the EITI, payments to government data, and some other company initiatives have made hitherto extractive related data that were not made available to the were not made available to the public in the past, which has made us carry out a lot of work in furthering transparency and holding governments and companies to account more recently. Next slide, please. So basically, on your screen, you'd see some of our key data sources. We use all of the reports published by NDC. We also use reports published by the NNPC, the DPR, and also beneficial ownership registers of the UK and Nigeria. Next slide, please. So in going into how we've utilized the data, we've engaged with various stakeholders, including government agencies, oil companies, and even host communities in trying to reconcile discrepancies and remediate gaps highlighted in some of the reports that I've highlighted. And just a prime example is an issue that was bordering on the equity ownership of a particular block, OML 53. And we use the data available to correspond with the company and also the government to find out the true fact on some of these issues. The next slide, please. Also, we've engaged with the DPR on a number of occasions trying to clarify some of the discrepancies we found out in their reports. And also we've used some the data to analyze and visualize fiscal flows to the federal government, specific government agencies, and also subnational governments from the Niger Delta, which are all producing states. The next slide, please. So this infographic here shows you an example of how we disaggregate the data to specific geographic locations. So if you look at the infographic on OML 4, 38 and 41, you would see where the size of the block, the operators of that particular block, then the payments to the federal government, the Nddc, and the local content development board. This allows host communities to make informed demands from the government based on what exactly had been extracted from their communities. Next slide, please. So we also try to portray that's the income streams of the Nddc between 2014 and 2019, making a disparity between, or a distinction between what statutory allocation from the federal government was and the 3% Nddc levy from the companies, as the case may be. The next slide, please. So we've also used the data, to push for invisible extraction affected communities to get more recognition in existing state and national government benefit sharing frameworks. Because what we've realized is all of the benefit sharing mechanisms that have been used to try to transfer benefits to extraction affected communities in the past have really not worked. And that's basically because these extraction affected communities have not been allowed to actively participate in any of those mechanisms or processes. The next slide, please. So this infographic we produced just shows you what the Nddc got as an interventionist agency in 2018 and what 8 other Niger Delta states got as 13% derivation and statutory allocation from the federal government. It would interest you to know that the Nddc as an interventionist agency got more than 5 Niger Delta states put together in 2018 as receipts, because we try to be careful about using the term revenue because of the false notion it gives to government that whatever windfall they get from natural resources is theirs to spend, forgetting that it's the present generation share of below the ground resources, resource wealth, as the case may be. The next slide, please. So we've also taken the data to communities. So we've had a series of town hall meetings in extraction affected communities. And we also realized that some other issues, aside the payments to government, data related issues, that's bordering on contract transparency, that's talking about the community development agreement with communities, have also come up in some of those some of those meetings, and which has further helped us to push for contract transparency, especially as it relates to community development agreement, and also contract agreements between resource extraction license holders and the government. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture of one of the town hall meetings we held in a resource extraction affected community. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. These are also some community members from Ibuno. They're actually standing in front of an abandoned Nddc shore protection project yard. And they just held up placards asking the Nddc and the oil companies to make sure that the benefits that are supposed to accrue to them is made available to them. Next slide, please. So these are also women from extraction affected communities that we facilitated to hold a radio town hall meeting on the International Women's Day. The next slide, please.
Iniobong, just quickly, if you could make sure you wrap up in the next minute.
Yeah, in the next minute. So we've also held series of Twitter chats on these the extractive sector related events also in the last couple of months. And this you can see on your screen some of the topics we treated in those chats. The next slide, please. Also, we've had series of policy engagements, one of which notably was a letter to the United States SEC asking to disaggregate payments to government-related data to further make our work easier. I think this is a good place to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iniobong. So I think that you'll probably see some of the deeply technical work that can be done with some of this data, and I can attest to the amount of work that's been involved in what Policy Alert has done in analyzing deeply this information and the complexities of trying to get to the bottom of some of the information in Nigeria. I think that's done some fantastic work there, and those infographics are great examples of how we can start to bring that data together in a much more useful and usable format to support your civil society activities and community activities in scrutinizing how money is being used and trying to hold government bodies to account in delivering services in their communities. So thank you so much for that. So our final presenter before we go to the Q&A section, over to Falan at Budget.
Good afternoon, everybody. Budget is a civic tech organization that works basically around public finance data. And we have a department that is dedicated solely to issues around the extractive sector. And of course, you can get a lot of information about our work, not just on Budget Twitter handle, but using the hashtag you can see on the screen now, Fix Our Oil, and also our website dedicated to extractive issues, fixouroil.com. Next slide, please. Okay, so how we work in the extractive unit is we consistently churn out outputs of oil and gas data analysis. And of course, we engage in capacity building for non-state actors, CSOs, and citizens as well. Most of the data, like Iniobong, the last speaker, has shown a lot of data. So what we do is we get insights from some of these data and we put them in a policy brief to engage with stakeholders, to engage with even the service side of governance, talking about NNPC and other stakeholders in the oil and gas industry from the government side. And of course, all of this work put together, we try to see that for all of the advocacy that we are carrying out, have we really made progress? And we keep tabs on the progress that have been made so far in the extractive industry to ensure that we are being able to measure the progress that we've made with our advocacy and see if there is any need to change strategy and all of that. Basically, before we go to the next slide, I'd like to say that our work revolve around three key components, which borders around stronger and wider alliances. And that is why we try as much as possible our budget to make sure that we not just work with citizens, we work with government, we work with CSOs to ensure that we are all on the same page to achieve the same thing, which is basically fiscal transparency in the extractive industry. We try to ensure that we get strong CSOs, stronger CSOs. Somebody mentioned it earlier about the need to develop the capacity of local CSOs. We do that a lot with community-based organizations trying to develop their technical capacity to hold government accountable and, of course, increase citizens' voices. So with increased citizen voices, what we intend to achieve is to make sure that the more citizens know about some of these issues in the extractive space, the more we can have a wider alliance to make sure that we demand for accountability in the sector. Next slide. So, so far, we have developed well over two policy briefs, but the policy briefs that are related to the conversation today are the ones that we try to use to benchmark NNPC's financial and operations performance within the oil and gas sector. So what we just basically do is at every point in time, we try to evaluate the performance of NNPC, and of course, not just in terms of their fiscal performance, but in terms of their operation as well. And we share insights from some of these findings with stakeholders, and of course, we share it on our platforms. Like I said, you can get all of this on fixouroil.com. Next slide. So what we do with NNPC data is we try to highlight the trends in NNPC's performance on a monthly basis, right? And not just NNPC performance alone. We try to look at other issues in the oil and gas space to see what are the loopholes in the fiscal condition of the sector, and of course, in the general operations performance. You talk about issues like pipeline vandalization, how much is being invested into the maintenance of pipelines and all of that. So we try to highlight this trend in a way that citizens can understand it, and most importantly, to take actions around some of these issues. And all data used in our analysis are always published on our platform, like I said, on Fix Our Oil and all of that. Next slide, please. So all our data, we try as much as possible to make them at first glance for people to understand, and we do that with our data visualization tools. So far, we've been doing that, and we'll continue to simplify oil and gas industry data using a blend of storytelling and infographics design. The purpose is to drive citizens' engagement. When more people understand the issues, more citizens and civil society members, please go back to the previous, more citizens and civil society members are able to put the right pressure on policymakers to make and implement remedial policies. And as you can see on the screen, those are some of the infographics that we've created in the past. Next slide. Of course, we do training sessions for CSOs, citizens group, on what they need to do, what they need to know to hold government accountable. And we also have an e-learning portal where an average citizen and anybody that is working in the extractive industry can get a hang-on, a self-paced understanding of issues in the extractive sector. If you need information about that, you can always reach out to us and all of that. Next slide, please. Of course, we also have consultative meeting with state and non-state actors in the extractive industry to keep deepening conversations around the issues that have been highlighted. I don't want to belabor them. The first and second speaker have highlighted perhaps most of all the issues in the extractive sector. And one of the strategies we have engaged is to keep engaging state and non-state actors from both the service side and the demand side to ensure that these conversations don't go under radar. And we do this every quarter. Next slide, please. And of course, citizens and stakeholder engagements using the media and all of that. We carry out extensive engagements targeting citizens and policymakers based on findings from our policy briefs and routine data analysis. And of course, we make sure that these are communicated through the right channels, radio, TV, online, and of course, Twitter sessions and all of that. Next slide. Yeah, Yeah, and of course, as part of engaging citizens to make sure that they understand the issues in the extractive sector, we also make sure that we create explainer videos that put the issues in context. And we have about 4 videos so far on our website that are related to the extractive industry. So these are just some of the things that we do at budgets to make sure that we hold government accountable and we hold key players accountable when it relates to issues in the extractive industry. I think this should be the next slide. Next slide. All right, I talked about the reform progress tracking framework. So we have a framework with which we monitor. For example, there was a time that NNPC do not frequently release their report. So using the 80 standard and of course through the OGP, we try as much as possible to track all of the reforms that we have been able to achieve so far, even based on commitment by the government of the country to say that, okay, this is the progress that we have made and all of that. And we have key uh, benchmarks that we've set to grade the reforms that has been accomplished in the extractive industry in the past 18 months. Next slide, please.
Hi, Fulan. Can you just make sure you wrap up in the next 1 minute, please?
All right.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Next slide. Can we? I think that's about it for us. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Fulan. And yeah, thank you for that presentation. I'm sure many of you will already be familiar with the great work that Budget does. I know we find that the work that they do fantastically helpful in breaking down data, making data more accessible and usable, not just on extractives industry, but more generally budgets across government activities in Nigeria. So thank you for that. So that's 4 organizations all doing quite and slightly different work around this area. But I hope that that's given an indication of some of the work that's already going on to try and start to address this challenge of making use of financial transparency data to bring about change on the ground. We've had a few questions come in. As I say, we've run over time a little bit, so we've got at least 15 minutes though to do question and answers. I'm sure we can go on a little longer if we still have questions coming in. So maybe let's just start with a relatively easy one, perhaps, that I'll pass over to Flora to answer, which is, in your presentation, you showed the Nddc budgets for, well, segments of them from 2016 and 2017. And for those not familiar with the Niger Delta Development Commission, it's the largest single spending public body in the Niger Delta. So a very important government agency. The question, Flora, is how easy has it been to access the Nddc budget? And what approaches have we been adopting to track Nddc contract awarding processes?
Thanks, Calvin, for the question. It hasn't really been easy. We all know what has been happening since last year with the probe and all at the Nddc. Now, I need to also mention that for us to be able to access the 2016-2017 Nddc budget, we had to go, behind, the doors. We got it, informally. We had written, FOI requests and all, but it wasn't attended to. But with our contact at the Ministry of the Niger Delta Affairs, we're able to get this budget. So we still are trying, and in collaboration with PLSI, we've been sending, FOI requests and all about getting details about contract awards, but till date, we still haven't gotten a response, but that doesn't mean we should relent.
Thank you very much. And I wonder if any of the other panelists wanted to answer this question of what approaches can be adopted to track Nddc contract awarding processes, because I think 1 or 2 of you might have done some work on this. If you want to respond on that, please unmute.
Hello?
Yeah, Fulan, go for it.
Okay, yeah. So really about NDDC again, like it's a challenge that is relative in the space, not just in the oil and gas space, not just limited to NDDC, but it seems like a challenge that we all face. But again, like she rightly responded, it's important that we seek to collaborate with these agencies and we ensure to begin to make sure that they do not see us as just uh, they begin to see us as partners in their own efficiency as different organization, and that is where it's always important for us as agency. I like the fact that SDN is working with PLSI, and I would recommend more collaborations like that. If we have an alliance and we try to engage them, of course, it may take a long time, but then we can always get a way around it to make sure that we have access to some of these data.
Thank you, Fulan. That's great. And I want to pose the next question over to Iniobong, because we've been asked how receptive are oil companies when you seek to reconcile discrepancies in payment to government data?
So I must admit, it's been difficult trying to get the companies in Nigeria to respond, but we managed to find a way around it through these sorts of collaborations as well. So what we do is we try to reach those companies in their home countries through some of our colleagues, be it in the UK, in Canada, in the US. So we write the companies in their home countries through some of our colleagues, and we get responses because obviously the policy space, the regulatory space over there is a little bit more receptive to transparency. And so we've been able to get responses to virtually all the letters we've sent to these companies in their home countries.
Thank you, Iniobong. And I think also, having been sort of on the sidelines watching the work you're doing, I can also attest to the amount of perseverance it's also taken to get that information, but that you have been able to do that, which is commendable. There's another question here, which it's very relevant to I suppose the process behind the payments that we then get data on, saying that we know there are no solid mechanisms in Nigeria for knowing exactly how much oil has been extracted and shipped. So what is the process of getting this done, i.e. getting the correct amount of crude extracted and the amount that is shipped out by the companies? Now, I will open this up to the panelists if anyone wants to provide a bit of an answer on that, but I'll start off on that one, which is, you're quite right that this is a major challenge. One thing I would point you to is you can go to SDN's website, because we've published a policy brief which in part looks at this question, called a leaky system, which looks at how we could start to use shipping and maritime intelligence data, commercial data, and remote sensing to start to improve the monitoring, particularly of marine imports and exports, to try and get a more independent assessment of the volumes that are being shipped. So I would recommend taking a look at that policy brief to see more of some of the ways that we've been looking at how we might start to answer that question. But would any of the panelists like to provide any more of an answer on that question?
Sure. Just to also explain why it's difficult to get data on the exact amount of oil that is extracted. So usually in places where things work, you have some sort of measurement at the wellhead, at the field level, and also at the export terminals. But what you find over here is that in a lot of cases, there are no meters at the wellhead, and it's deliberate. That's because a lot of theft goes on between the wellhead and the field, and between the field and the export terminals. So what happens most times is the volume. They have an allocation quota for each particular field. So depending on what comes in at the terminal head or at the export terminal, as the case may be, in some cases at the field level, they now do use that allocation quota to now determine what exactly came from the wellheads, as the case may be, or the field. So no measurement at all is done at the wellhead. That's why a lot of theft happens at that point. So at this point in time, we don't really know what exactly is extracted that's from the ground at the wellhead, which is the first point of extraction. And it's deliberate by the companies. I'm sure the companies know what they produce, but the government definitely doesn't know what exactly is produced at the wellhead.
Thank you very much for that, Inyabon. And I think that that points to an important part of the solution as well, which is improved metering at wellheads. Although I know there are also challenges then that it's not, you're not necessarily just measuring crude volume, but that can be mixed in with water. So there are technical challenges to that I appreciate as well. But thank you for that. That's great. If anyone does have any more questions, please do pop them in the chat. At the moment, I think we just got one further comment at the moment, which I think is worth kind of mentioning to the panelists. David mentioning that he's a retired oil company manager and would think that some of his colleagues would be willing to assist in verifying data and preparing questions. So mentioning particularly Inyabong Policy Alert might want to consider how to attract former experienced oil industry auditors to support in the work could be helpful in interpreting US SEC responses, finding alternative sources of data if you're not able to get useful replies from companies. And I think that that's definitely a very valid approach and something we could think about. So thank you for that suggestion. Yeah, I haven't got any more questions coming in, so I'll just give it a moment to see if anyone wants to add anything else into the chat box. We've got, another, we're getting close to the end time anyway. We've just got 5 minutes left, but I'll just give it a few moments to see if any final questions come in. But in the meantime, obviously, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining today's events. We're going to be sending a follow-up email with links to relevant resources, including a recording from this webinar. One further apology for the slides flying around during the SDN presentation. There was a technical problem where Flora couldn't see the slides on her screen, so was having to present in the dark. So apologies if that was a bit confusing, but hopefully it was clear enough for everyone to follow that. Yeah, and we'll also be sending a link to SDN's latest report, where you can see how we've tried to establish a way that we can work with communities on the ground, making use of this payment to government data. So there are no further questions coming into the chat, so I'm going to wrap up now. Yeah, so as I said, we've had presentations from SDN, from Budget, PLSI, Policy Alert. You've had, you can probably see the wide variety of types of work that we're trying to do to bring this data to life and make it useful for civil society, make it useful for working with communities to bring about change on the ground. When you do receive that follow-up email from us, please do feel free to get in touch, and we'll also be able to put you in touch with Budget, PLSI, Policy Alert if you want to follow up with any specific questions or any matters to them. So thanks once again. This is just really SDN's first start of working in this area. We hope to kind of scale up this work, working with our partners on this call and with others. So if you're interested to discuss this work further, please do get in touch with us. And thank you once again. And we'll leave the event recording again for another couple of minutes in case there's anything that you want to grab from the chat box or anything like that, and then we'll close the room. Thank you once again. Thanks to Flora and all our presenters from Budget, PLSI and Policy Alert today.